She didn't know her life was about to change when she paid for that stranger's meal. It was just another Tuesday morning, the kind where the coffee tastes bitter and the world feels a little too heavy on your shoulders. But sometimes, the universe has other plans. Sarah Miller wasn't rich. She worked 2 jobs, drove a car that coughed more than it purred, and counted every penny twice before spending it. Yet that morning, something stirred inside her chest. Something she couldn't quite name. The diner smelled like bacon grease and broken dreams. The fluorescent lights flickered like dying stars. And there, in the corner booth, sat an old man counting coins with trembling fingers. 27 cents, 32 cents. His weathered hands moved slowly, desperately, as if those coins held the weight of the world. Have you ever watched someone's dignity crumble in real time? The waitress stood there, impatient. The clock on the wall ticked louder than thunder. Other customers pretended not to notice, but Sarah saw everything. The way his shoulders curved inward, the way his eyes avoided everyone else's, the way hunger makes you small. She didn't think. She just moved. "I'll cover his meal," she said, her voice cutting through the morning chaos like a knife through silence. The words surprised even her. $15 she couldn't afford to lose. $15 that meant choosing between gas and groceries this week. The old man looked up, and for a moment time stopped. His eyes weren't just grateful. They were something else. Something deeper. Something that made Sarah's heart skip, in a way she couldn't explain. "Why?" he whispered. And in that single word lived 1,000 stories of people who had walked past him, ignored him, forgotten he was human. Sarah didn't have an answer. Sometimes the most profound acts come from places we don't understand. Sometimes kindness doesn't need a reason, it just needs to exist. The old man's name was Arthur, and he ate like someone who hadn't seen a proper meal in days. Sarah sat across from him watching. Not because she expected thanks, but because something about this moment felt bigger than both of them. Have you ever felt the universe holding its breath? Between bites of scrambled eggs and toast, Arthur told her things, not his whole story. Broken people rarely share everything at once, but enough. Enough to know that life had been cruel, that he'd once been somebody, that he'd lost more than most people ever have to begin with. "I used to teach," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Philosophy. 30 years at the university." His hands shook slightly as he reached for his coffee. Funny how quickly you can go from discussing the meaning of existence to wondering if you'll exist tomorrow. Sarah listened, really listened, not the way most people do, with one ear open and their mind somewhere else. She listened with her whole being, and Arthur felt it. When was the last time someone truly heard you? The diner around them buzzed with life, but they sat in their own bubble of connection. 2 strangers brought together by $15 and something deeper than money could ever touch. "You remind me of someone," Arthur said suddenly, studying her face with those ancient eyes. "Someone I knew a long time ago. Someone who believed the world could be different." Sarah smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. She'd stopped believing in different a long time ago. Life had a way of beating the hope out of you, one disappointment at a time. Yet here she was, spending money she didn't have on a stranger she'd never see again, or so she thought. Arthur finished his meal slowly, savoring each bite like it might be his last. When he stood to leave, he paused. His hand found hers across the table, paper-thin skin against work-worn fingers. "Thank you," he said, but his eyes said more. His eyes said, "You've done something that matters. You've reminded me that humans can still be human." Sarah watched him shuffle out of the diner, his old coat hanging loose on his thin frame. She didn't know why her chest felt so tight. She didn't know why tears threatened to spill. She only knew that something had shifted in the universe, and she'd been part of it. The $15 was already forgotten. Some things cost everything and nothing at the same time. That night, Sarah lay in bed staring at the water stain on her ceiling that looked like a map to nowhere. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying the morning. Arthur's eyes, his trembling hands, the weight of his thank you. She'd done kind things before, held doors, given spare change, smiled at strangers. But this felt different. This felt like touching the edge of something sacred. Do you ever wonder if your small actions ripple out in ways you'll never see? Sarah didn't believe in fate. She didn't believe in signs. She was too practical for that. Too worn down by life's sharp edges. But lying there in the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been exactly where she needed to be, exactly when she needed to be there. Her phone buzzed. Another bill reminder. Another number in red. Another weight on her shoulders. She'd given away $15 she couldn't afford to lose, and for what? For a moment of connection with a stranger she'd never see again? Yet she didn't regret it. Not even a little. That's the thing about genuine kindness. It doesn't ask for receipts. It doesn't calculate return on investment. It simply flows from one human to another, like water finding its level. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe takes notice. Sarah finally drifted off to sleep around 3 a.m., her dreams filled with diners and old men, and the strange feeling that her life was about to change. She didn't know how right she was. She didn't know that Arthur hadn't shuffled off into obscurity. She didn't know that some strangers carry magic in their pockets, waiting for someone worthy enough to receive it. The morning would come too soon, bringing with it the usual struggles. The broken car that needed fixing, the second job that barely paid enough, the endless cycle of almost but not quite making it. But first, she slept. And somewhere across town, an old man sat at a desk, writing by lamplight. His hands didn't shake now. His eyes were clear and focused. He had something important to do, something that had been waiting years for the right moment, the right person. Sarah Miller had no idea what she'd set in motion with $15 and an open heart. Most people never do. We cast our kindness into the world like seeds in the wind, never knowing which ones will take root, which ones will grow into something magnificent. But Arthur knew. Arthur had been waiting for someone like Sarah for a very long time, and now, finally, he could complete what he'd started all those years ago. Wednesday morning arrived like an unwelcome guest, gray and drizzling. Sarah's alarm screamed at 5 a.m., dragging her from dreams she couldn't quite remember. Another day, another dollar. Except she was $15 shorter than yesterday. The coffee maker sputtered and died halfway through brewing. Of course it did. She dressed in the dark, her uniform for the hotel where she cleaned rooms that cost more per night than she made in a week. Have you ever felt like you're living in someone else's leftovers? The walk to the bus stop was the same as always, past the homeless man who slept under the blue tarp, past the abandoned grocery store, with its windows like dead eyes, past the flowers that somehow grew through the concrete cracks, defiant and beautiful. But when she reached her apartment building that evening, exhausted and smelling like industrial cleaner, something was different. There, on her doorstep, sat a package, not a delivery. She never ordered anything. Not a mistake, her name was written on it in handwriting that belonged to another era. Sarah Miller, apartment 4B. The letters curved and flowed like water, like someone who'd learned to write when writing was an art. Her heart did something strange in her chest. A flutter, a skip, a moment of suspended disbelief. The package was wrapped in brown paper tied with string. Who still wrapped packages like that? Who still took such care? She looked around, but the hallway was empty. Just her and this mystery, this impossibility sitting on her welcome mat that said, "Home Sweet Home" in letters worn thin by too many feet. Sarah picked it up carefully, like it might disappear if she moved too fast. It was heavier than it looked. Solid, real. Her hands shook slightly as she fumbled for her keys, and she didn't know why. It was just a package. Probably a mistake. Probably nothing. But her heart knew better. Hearts always do. Inside her apartment, she set it on the kitchen table, the wobbly one she'd found on the curb 2 years ago. The string came undone easily, like it had been waiting for her touch. The brown paper fell away like old skin, and there it was, a wooden box, polished until it gleamed. The kind of box that held secrets, that held stories, that held things too precious for ordinary containers. On top, a letter in the same flowing handwriting. Her name on the envelope made her breath catch. When was the last time something took your breath away? Sarah's fingers trembled as she opened the letter. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that whispered wealth with every fiber. But the words were worth more than any paper could ever be. "Dear Sarah," it began, and she could almost hear Arthur's voice in the careful script. "You don't know me. Not really. Yesterday you saw an old man counting coins and chose compassion over convenience. You saw a human being where others saw an inconvenience. What you didn't see was a test, not a test I created, but one that life presented, and you passed with the kind of grace that's become extinct in this world. My name is Arthur Pemberton. Yes, that Arthur Pemberton, the one whose name is on buildings at the university, the one who supposedly died 3 years ago. The reports of my death, as they say, were greatly exaggerated, or rather strategically orchestrated. You see, Sarah, I've spent the last 3 years looking for something. Not something. Someone. Someone who would prove to me that humanity hadn't lost its heart. Someone who would give when they had little to give. Someone who would see the invisible and make them visible again. I've sat in that diner every morning for 3 years. I've watched hundreds of people count their blessings while I counted coins. I've seen good people walk by, too busy to notice. I've seen wealthy people step over me like I was a crack in the sidewalk. Until yesterday. Until you. Sarah had to stop reading. Her vision blurred with tears she didn't understand. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Did they? She forced herself to continue. In this box, you'll find the answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. You'll find the reason I've been waiting. You'll find proof that sometimes the universe rewards those who give without expecting reward. But more than that, Sarah, you'll find a choice. Because what's in this box isn't just a gift, it's a responsibility. It's a torch being passed. It's a chance to be more than you ever imagined you could be. Open it when you're ready. And know that whatever you decide, you've already changed. One old man's life. You've already proven that kindness isn't dead. It was just waiting for someone like you to wake it up. With profound gratitude and infinite hope, Arthur. Sarah set the letter down with shaking hands. The wooden box sat before her, patient and mysterious. She could hear her own heartbeat in the silence of her small apartment. She could feel the weight of this moment pressing down on her shoulders. What would you do? Would you open it immediately, driven by curiosity? Or would you wait, savoring the last moments before everything changed? Sarah knew, with that deep knowing that comes from somewhere beyond thought, that opening this box would change everything, that her life would have a before and after, that Arthur Pemberton, whoever he really was, had just offered her a door to somewhere else. She took a deep breath, then another. Her hand moved toward the box's brass latch, and the universe held its breath with her. The latch clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through time. Inside the box, nested in midnight blue velvet, lay 3 things that made Sarah's world tilt on its axis. A key unlike any she'd ever seen, ornate old with a tag that read simply, "When you're ready." A bank book with her name on it, the numbers inside making her gasp and sink into the nearest chair. And a photograph. The photograph stopped her heart. It was her grandmother, young and radiant, standing next to a young man who could only be Arthur. They were laughing at something beyond the camera's view, their joy so pure it leaked through the decades. On the back, in her grandmother's handwriting, Arthur and Rose, 1962, before everything changed. Do you believe in circles? In stories that take lifetimes to complete? Sarah's grandmother Rose had died when Sarah was 12, but not before filling her granddaughter's head with stories of a young man she'd known. A brilliant philosopher who'd believed the world could be healed with small acts of kindness. A man who disappeared one day, leaving only theories and heartbreak behind. He said he'd find a way to change the world, Rose had whispered once, her eyes distant with memory. Said he'd prove that kindness could ripple out like stones in water, changing everything it touched. I never stopped believing he would. Now, Sarah understood. The test, the diner, the careful watching. Arthur had spent decades building his fortune, then 3 years looking for someone who carried Rose's spark, someone who would give without counting the cost, someone who would see the human behind the hunger. The bank book held enough to change everything, enough to quit both jobs, enough to go back to school, enough to become the teacher she'd always dreamed of being before life got in the way. But it was the small note tucked beneath it that made her cry. Rose always said her granddaughter would be special. She said you'd have her heart but your own fire. She was right. This isn't charity, Sarah, this is an investment. In you. In the kindness you'll spread. In the lives you'll change. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National. Inside, you'll find the rest of your inheritance. Not money, but something more valuable. Rose's letters. Our story. And instructions for how to carry on what we started. Sarah sat in her small kitchen as the rain painted patterns on the windows. The wooden box lay open before her, like a door to another life. She thought about all the mornings she'd rushed past, strangers too tired to see them, all the opportunities to be kind that she'd missed because she was too busy surviving to truly live. But she'd seen Arthur. She'd stopped. She'd given what she couldn't afford to lose. And now the universe was showing her what Rose had always known, that kindness isn't a luxury for those who have extra. It's a necessity for those who understand that we're all walking each other home. The numbers in the bank book were staggering, life-changing, but it was the photograph she held to her chest, her grandmother's young face full of hope and love. This wasn't just about money. This was about completing a love story that had spanned decades. This was about proving that small acts of kindness could indeed change the world, one person at a time, one meal at a time, one moment of seeing someone, truly, deeply, completely at a time. Sarah didn't sleep that night. How could she? She sat at her kitchen table reading Rose's letters by lamplight. Each one was a window into a love story she'd never fully understood. Arthur and Rose, young and brilliant and full of impossible dreams. They'd met at a philosophy lecture where he'd argued that human kindness was the only force powerful enough to save the world. And she'd challenged him to prove it. "I'll spend my whole life proving it," he'd written in one letter. "Even if it takes me away from you. Even if it means becoming someone else. Even if it means waiting decades to find the right person to carry on our work. Have you ever discovered that your life was part of a larger story you didn't even know was being written?" Rose had married Sarah's grandfather after Arthur disappeared, but she'd never stopped believing. She'd raised her children and grandchildren on stories of kindness, on the belief that small acts could create earthquakes of change. Sarah had thought they were just stories, beautiful, but impractical. The kind of thing you tell children before the world teaches them better. But Arthur had built an empire, tech companies, real estate, innovations that had quietly changed the world. And through it all, he'd been searching, setting up his test, waiting for someone who carried Rose's spark. The safety deposit box key felt heavy in Sarah's hand. First National opened at 9 a.m. She'd called in sick to both jobs, for the first time in 3 years. Her managers had been shocked. Reliable, Sarah, never missing a shift, suddenly claiming she couldn't come in, if they only knew. As dawn painted the sky pink and gold, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't just take the money and run. She wouldn't just use this gift to make her own life easier. She'd do what Arthur and Rose had always dreamed of. She'd prove that kindness could ripple out, touching lives, changing everything. But first, she had to know the whole story. The bank was all marble and hushed voices, the kind of place where Sarah had always felt small. But not today. Today, she walked in carrying secrets and possibilities. The key fit perfectly into box 1962. Of course it did. Inside, 3 thick journals bound in leather, a smaller wooden box, and an envelope, marked "Read First." Her hand shook as she opened it. Dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then you've already proven everything Rose and I believed. You've shown that kindness doesn't depend on circumstances, that generosity isn't about having extra. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, all responsible for each other. These journals contain everything: our research, our experiments in kindness, the results that the academic world wasn't ready to accept. We proved, scientifically and repeatedly, that single acts of kindness create ripple effects that can be measured for generations. But the world wanted profit margins, not proof of human goodness. So I went underground, built wealth not for its own sake, but to fund this moment, to find you, to pass on what Rose and I discovered. The smaller box contains something personal, something Rose wanted you to have when the time was right. Open it when you're alone, when you're ready to understand why she never stopped believing in the power of small acts to change the world. Your work begins now, if you choose to accept it, not as charity, but as revolution. One meal, one moment, one act of unexpected kindness at a time. The world is waiting, Sarah. It's been waiting for someone like you for a very long time. Back in her apartment, Sarah opened the smaller wooden box with trembling fingers. Inside lay her grandmother's wedding ring. Not the one she'd worn after marrying Sarah's grandfather, but a different one. A simple band with an inscription worn smooth by years of secret wearing. Small acts, infinite ripples. A&R, 1962. Beneath it, a single photograph she'd never seen. Her grandmother, radiant in a simple white dress, standing beside Arthur, in a courthouse. Married. They'd been married before he disappeared, before the world pulled them in different directions. The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. Arthur wasn't just her grandmother's lost love. He was her grandfather, her actual grandfather. The businessman she'd called grandfather her whole life had known, had raised Rose's daughter as his own, had kept the secret out of love. Are there any greater acts of kindness than raising another man's child with grace? Than loving someone enough to let them keep their secrets and their private grief? Sarah understood now why she'd always felt different, why small acts of kindness had always called to her, even when life tried to beat that impulse out of her. It was in her blood, literally. This compassion, this need to see the invisible people, it was her inheritance. The journals were dense with research, experiments, documented proof that kindness created measurable change. Brain scans showing how witnessing unexpected generosity literally rewired neural pathways. Statistical models proving that one act of kindness inspired an average of 4 more. Case studies tracking single moments of compassion through decades, showing how they rippled out in ways no one could predict. But it was the personal notes in the margins that made Sarah cry. Rose's handwriting next to Arthur's, their minds dancing, together on the page, planning a future where they'd teach the world what they'd discovered. A future that had been derailed but never destroyed. We failed, Arthur had written after one particularly harsh academic rejection. But Rose's response was there in faded blue ink. No, we planted seeds. Someone else will tend the garden. Sarah was that someone else. The bank book showed more money than she'd ever dreamed of. But now she understood it wasn't meant for her alone. It was seed money for a revolution of kindness. Arthur and Rose had proven the science. They'd built the foundation. Now it was her turn to build something beautiful on top of it. She thought about all the invisible people in her life. The homeless man under the blue tarp, the single mother at her hotel job who was always 10 minutes late because of daycare, the elderly woman next door who pretended she wasn't lonely, the teenager at the bus stop who tried to hide his hunger behind headphones and attitude. What if she could see them all? What if she could create a network of people who truly saw each other? What if small acts of kindness could become a movement, a force, a quiet revolution that changed everything? Sarah picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. There weren't many. When you work 2 jobs and barely survive, friendships become luxury items you can't afford. But there were a few. People like her, good people ground down by circumstance, People who would understand what she was about to propose. She started typing a message. Want to help me change the world? It starts with coffee tomorrow morning. My treat. Because that's how revolutions begin. Not with grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but with coffee and conversation, and the radical belief that we can be better to each other. Within a week, Sarah's small apartment had become revolution headquarters. They called themselves the Ripple Effect, and they were beautiful in their ordinariness. Marcus, the bus driver who'd been giving free rides to kids who couldn't afford them. Elena, the nurse who spent her days off cooking meals for elderly neighbors. James, the teacher buying supplies with his grocery money. People who'd been practicing kindness in the shadows, thinking they were alone. They weren't alone anymore. It's not charity, Sarah explained, spreading Arthur and Rose's research across her kitchen table. It's science. It's rebellion. It's proving that the world runs on kindness, not competition. We just have to make it visible. Do you know what happens when invisible people realize they're an army? They started small, following Arthur and Rose's protocols. Random acts of kindness, but documented, measured. They paid for strangers' groceries and watched what happened. Next, they left care packages for homeless neighbors and tracked the ripples. They created a phone tree for elderly folks who just needed someone to talk to. And something magical happened. The ripples weren't just measurable, they were visible. The grocery store stranger paid for someone else's milk the next day. The homeless man who received a care package started helping clean up the park. The elderly woman who got a daily phone call began baking cookies for the whole building. But it was bigger than individual acts. Sarah used Arthur's money to rent a small storefront. Nothing fancy, just a place where kindness could have an address. They called it the Ripple Center, and it became a hub for connection. Free meals on Mondays, job training on Wednesdays. A place where anyone could walk in and either give help or receive it, no questions asked. The media didn't know what to make of them at first. Were they a charity? A social experiment? A cult of kindness? Sarah didn't care about labels. She cared about the single mother who'd found free childcare so she could finish her degree. The veteran who'd discovered that teaching woodworking to kids healed something broken inside him. The teenager who'd gone from receiving meals to cooking them, finding purpose in feeding others. 3 months in, something shifted. Other cities started calling. How did you start this? How can we create our own Ripple Center? Sarah shared everything, the research, the protocols, the simple belief that humans are wired for kindness. They just need permission and structure to express. She thought of Arthur often, wondered if he was watching. She'd tried to find him, but the trail went cold after the diner, like a magician who knew when to take his bow and disappear. But she felt him in every small victory, every moment when someone chose compassion over indifference. One evening, exhausted but exhilarated, Sarah stood in the Ripple Center watching a room full of strangers becoming family. The banker teaching financial literacy to kids who'd never had a bank account. The chef showing homeless folks how to make nutritious meals from food bank staples. The lawyer offering free consultations to people the system had forgotten. This was what Arthur and Rose had dreamed of. Not charity that created dependence, but kindness that created connection. Not helping from above, but standing beside. Not fixing people, but seeing them, truly seeing them, and letting that recognition heal what was broken. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number, a simple text. Rose would be so proud. Keep going, the best ripples are yet to come. Sarah smiled, tears blurring her vision. She was keeping going. They all were. Because once you understand that kindness is a superpower, you can't help but use it. A year later, Sarah stood before the United Nations Assembly, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. How does a hotel cleaner end up addressing world leaders? One ripple at a time. The ripple effect had spread to 47 cities across 16 countries, not through aggressive marketing or corporate expansion, but through the simple viral nature of kindness itself. Each center was different, shaped by its community's needs, but all followed the same principle. Small acts, infinite ripples. We've been told that humans are inherently selfish, Sarah began, her voice clear and strong. That competition drives evolution, that only the ruthless survive. But our research decades of it, proves the opposite. Kindness is our superpower. Compassion is what helped us survive as a species. We're literally wired to care for each other. She clicked to the first slide. Brain scans showing the neural fireworks that exploded when people witnessed unexpected kindness. Then the statistics. Crime rates dropping in Ripple neighborhoods, suicide rates plummeting, economic indicators rising as communities began functioning like healthy organisms instead of battlegrounds. This isn't about feeling good, Sarah continued. This is about survival. In a world facing climate change, inequality, and countless other challenges, kindness isn't naive. It's necessary. It's the only force powerful enough to create the cooperation we need to survive. Have you ever watched an idea whose time has come finally arrive? The questions afterward were skeptical but curious. How do you fund this? Communities fund themselves once they start functioning properly. How do you prevent people from taking advantage? You don't. You trust that most people given the chance choose connection over exploitation. How do you measure success? In ripples, not dollars, in connections, not statistics. But it was the quiet conversation afterward that changed everything. The Secretary General pulled her aside, eyes bright with something that looked like hope. My grandmother used to tell me stories, she said softly, about a professor who believed kindness could save the world. Arthur Pemberton. She was one of his students before he disappeared. She never stopped believing his theories would someday be proven right. Sarah's breath caught. Another ripple. Another connection spanning decades. Arthur and Rose's work touching, lives they'd never know about, creating waves that were still moving, still growing. We want to create a global initiative, the Secretary General continued. Not to control what you've built, but to support it. To prove that kindness isn't just personal, it's political. It's how we solve the unsolvable problems. That night in her hotel room overlooking the East River, Sarah finally opened the last letter Arthur had left her. She'd been saving it, somehow knowing she'd need it at exactly this moment. Dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then the ripples have become waves. Rose always said it would happen this way. Not through force or manipulation, but through the simple recognition of what we've always been. Creatures of connection, beings built for kindness. You've probably figured out by now that I've been watching, helping when I could, clearing obstacles you never knew existed. But this was always your revolution, yours and theirs. All the invisible people who chose to become visible, to matter, to connect. I'm old now, older than I have any right to be. But I've lived to see our dream take root. I've watched you water it with your own kindness, your own courage. Rose was right about you. She was right about everything. Keep going. The world is changing, one small act at a time. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Rose and I are dancing, grateful that our granddaughter understood what we spent our lives trying to prove. Love is the only revolution that works. All my love, Arthur, grandfather, Sarah clutched the letter to her chest and wept, for the grandparents she'd found and lost, for the revolution born from $15 and compassion, for all the invisible people becoming visible, for the world that was finally ready to try kindness. As a survival strategy, tomorrow she'd fly home. Tomorrow she'd walk back into the Ripple Center and continue the quiet work of changing the world. But tonight, she stood at the window watching the city lights reflect on the water, each light a person, each person a potential ripple, each ripple a chance to prove that we're better together than alone. 5 years had passed since that morning in the diner, and the world looked different now. Not perfect. Perfection was never the goal. But kinder, more connected, more aware that we're all walking each other home. Sarah stood in the rain outside, a familiar diner, the one where it all began. It had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, though most people didn't know the full story. They just knew that something important had happened here, that an old man and a young woman had proven something about the human heart that changed everything. The ripple effect wasn't an organization anymore. It was a way of being. Schools taught kindness as a core subject, using Arthur and Rose's research. Businesses measured success in community impact, not just profit. Governments created departments of human connection. It sounded utopian, but it was really just practical. Kindness worked. The data was undeniable. But today, Sarah wasn't thinking about global impact. She was thinking about one old man she'd never found again. She pushed open the diner door, bell chiming exactly as it had that morning. Same smell of bacon and coffee, same flickering lights, same corner booth. But this time, someone was waiting. For her. Not Arthur. She'd accepted he was gone, maybe had been gone even when he'd sent those texts. But a woman her own age, with familiar eyes and trembling hands holding a coffee cup. "You're Sarah," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Anna. Arthur Pemberton was my grandfather too." The world tilted, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Sarah slid into the booth, heart racing. How many secrets had Arthur kept? How many ripples had he set in motion? "He told me to wait," Anna continued. "To watch what you built. To come find you when the time was right. He said you'd proven the first part of the theory, that kindness spreads. But there's a second part, something he and Rose discovered but never had the chance to test." She pulled out a journal Sarah had never seen. Its pages yellow with age, but the ideas inside still electric with possibility. The second phase of their research. Not just spreading kindness, but creating what they called compassion networks, interconnected webs of people so committed to seeing each other that cruelty became impossible, that isolation became extinct. Have you ever realized that the revolution you thought you were finishing was actually just beginning? "There are more of us," Anna said quietly. "Grandchildren, great-grandchildren, students of students, all carrying pieces of their work, all waiting for someone to prove the first phase so we could begin the second. You did that, Sarah. You proved kindness could spread. Now we prove it can last." Sarah took the journal with shaking hands. Inside, Rose's handwriting danced with Arthur's, their minds still collaborating across time and death. The second phase was ambitious, creating sustainable communities where kindness wasn't random but systemic, where seeing each other was as natural as breathing. "Where do we start?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Where you always start." Anna smiled. And it was Arthur's smile, Rose's smile, the smile of people who knew secrets about the human heart, with a single act of kindness, but this time we're not alone. She gestured to the diner, and Sarah realized it wasn't empty. Every booth held someone she'd helped or who'd helped others. The boy who'd received free tutoring and became a doctor. The woman whose grocery bill had been paid and started a food bank. The veteran who'd found purpose and now ran 3 Ripple centers. They'd all gotten the same message. Come to where it started. Bring your stories. Be ready for phase 2. Sarah laughed, tears streaming down her face. Of course Arthur had planned this. Of course there was more. The ripples never stopped. They just got bigger, deeper, more complex. What started with $15 and a moment of compassion had become a movement. Now that movement would become a new way of living. "He left you something," Anna said, sliding an envelope across the table. Sarah's name in that familiar flowing script. Inside, a photo she'd never seen. Arthur and Rose, old and gray but radiant, standing in front of the first Ripple Center the day it opened. They'd been there. They'd seen it begin. On the back, 4 words that contained everything. Now, you know why. Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at a crowd that filled the university auditorium and spilled onto the lawns outside. The Arthur and Rose Pemberton Institute for Human Connection was officially opening, built on the site where they'd first met, first argued about whether kindness could save the world. The building was beautiful but functional, spaces designed for connection, for learning, for proving over and over that humans are better together. 10 years since the diner. 10 years since $15 changed everything. My grandparents believed something radical, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the sea of faces. They believed kindness wasn't weakness, but strength. That compassion wasn't naive, but necessary. That small acts could create infinite ripples. They were right. The data was overwhelming now. Cities with ripple centers had seen poverty rates drop by 60%. Countries that had adopted compassion networks reported the highest happiness indices in human history. The old way, competition, isolation, indifference, was dying. Not because anyone forced it, but because people had tasted something better. But this isn't about statistics, Sarah continued. It's about the man who sleeps warm tonight because someone saw him. It's about the child who believes in goodness because someone showed her it exists. It's about all of us choosing every day to see each other, to matter to each other, to remember that we're writing one story together. In the audience, Anna smiled. The second phase was working better than even Arthur and Rose had dreamed. For real, compassion networks had become self-sustaining ecosystems of care. People weren't just performing random acts of kindness anymore. They were living kindness, breathing it, building their lives around the radical idea that we belong to each other. 10 years ago, I was nobody, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. A hotel cleaner, a woman counting pennies, someone the world had trained to be invisible. But one morning, I saw someone even more invisible than me, and I made a choice. Not a grand choice, not a heroic choice, just a human choice to see, to care, to act. She paused, looking at the faces before her. Young and old, rich and poor, all united by the understanding that kindness wasn't just personal, it was revolutionary. That's all any of us have to do. See someone, care, act. The ripples, we'll handle the rest. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah barely heard it. She was thinking about Arthur wherever he was, about Rose, whose belief had sparked all of this, about the countless invisible people who'd become visible, who'd discovered they mattered, who'd learned that their small acts could change the world. After the ceremony, as the sun set over the campus where it all began, Sarah found herself alone, in the memorial garden. 2 benches sat facing each other, plaques reading simply, Arthur and Rose. She sat on Rose's bench, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of what they'd built. A young man approached, nervous but determined. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm starting university next week and I don't have enough for textbooks. I hate to ask, but..." Sarah smiled, reaching for her wallet. Some things never change. Some things should never change. "Of course," she said, handing him probably more than he needed. "We all need help sometimes." The young man's eyes widened with gratitude and something else. Recognition that this wasn't just about money. This was about being seen, about mattering, about the revolutionary act of caring for a stranger. "Pay it forward when you can," Sarah added, the words automatic now, sacred, small acts, infinite ripples. As he walked away, almost glowing with the knowledge that kindness existed, that he mattered, Sarah felt the presence she'd been waiting for. Not ghostly, not mystical, just the weight of being watched by someone who understood. She turned, and there he was, Arthur. Ancient now, leaning heavily on a cane, but his eyes still bright with the fire that had started everything. "Hello, granddaughter," he said simply. Sarah didn't run to him, didn't demand explanations, just moved over on Rose's bench, making room. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of hope. "Was it what you dreamed?" she finally asked. Arthur smiled. And in that smile was every ripple, every connection, every moment when someone chose kindness over indifference. "It was more," he said softly. "Rose always said it would be more. She said when the right person found our work, they wouldn't just continue it, they'd transform it into something we never imagined. She was right about everything, wasn't she? Everything that mattered." He pulled out a worn photo, Sarah at the UN, addressing the world. She would have been so proud, not of the fame or the success, but of this. He gestured to the campus, full of people learning how to see each other, of the quiet revolution, of proving that love is the only force that changes anything. They sat until the stars came out, grandfather and granddaughter connected by more than blood, by belief, by purpose, by the understanding that small acts could create infinite ripples. "Will you stay?" Sarah asked as he stood to leave. Arthur shook his head. My part is done. This is your story now. Yours and theirs and everyone who chooses to see. But Sarah? He turned back, eyes twinkling. Keep watching for the invisible ones. Keep believing in the $15 miracles. Keep proving that kindness isn't just the answer. It's the question, the journey, and the destination. He walked away, disappearing into the gentle darkness, but Sarah wasn't sad. How could she be? The ripples continued. The revolution grew. And somewhere in the city, someone was counting coins in a diner, waiting for another human to see them, to start another story, to prove again that we're all capable of changing the world. One small act at a time. One infinite ripple at a time. One connection at a time. The next morning, Sarah walked into a coffee shop near the university. The barista was new, nervous, fumbling with the register. The line grew impatient. People checked phones, rolled eyes, radiated the low-level irritation of interrupted routines. Sarah stepped forward. Take your time, she said gently. We're all human here. The barista looked up, relief flooding her face. The tension in the line eased. Someone smiled. Someone else put away their phone. The moment shifted, softened, became human again. Small act. Infinite ripples. Behind Sarah, an elderly professor watched with interest. He'd been skeptical of all this kindness revolution business. Too soft, he'd thought. Too idealistic. But watching, this simple moment, the way compassion spread through the line like light through water, something in him shifted. When he reached the counter, he did something he'd never done before. He looked the barista in the eye. Really looked. Thank you, he said, meaning it. I hope your day gets easier. She smiled, and in that smile was everything Arthur and Rose had believed, everything Sarah had proven, everything the world was slowly learning. We are never more human than when we see each other's humanity. The professor left the coffee shop different than he'd entered. He had a lecture to give on economic theory, but suddenly he wanted to talk about something else. About interconnection, about the economics of kindness, about what happened when you measured success not in profit but in ripples. He didn't know that his lecture would inspire a student to start a ripple center in her hometown. He didn't know that student would help a young mother finish her degree. He didn't know that mother would become a teacher who would inspire thousands of children to choose kindness. He didn't know any of that. He just knew that something had shifted in a coffee shop, that a young woman's patience had reminded him of something essential, and that maybe, just maybe, the idealists had been right all along. The ripples continued. They always do. They always will, because that's the secret Arthur and Rose discovered, the truth Sarah proved, the revolution that started with $15 and a moment of seeing. Kindness isn't just what we do. It's who we are. And once we remember that, once we start living it, the world changes. One small act at a time. Forever and ever. Until the ripples reach every shore, touch every life, and remind every human being of the truth we've always known, but sometimes forget. We belong to each other. We always have. We always will. And that belonging, that seeing, that caring, that choosing to matter to each other, that's how we save the world. Not with grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but with Tuesday morning coffees and $15 kindnesses and the revolutionary act of looking someone in the eye and saying, I see you, you matter. We're in this together. The ripples never end. They never end. Sarah walked out of the coffee shop into the morning sun, her phone buzzing with messages from ripple centers around the world. New challenges, new victories, new proof that humans were learning to human again. She smiled, thinking of Arthur, and Rose, of all the invisible people becoming visible, of the quiet revolution that had begun in a diner and now reached every corner of the earth. Her own granddaughter walked beside her, Anna's daughter, carrying the next generation of the dream. Tell me again about the $15, the girl said, though she knew the story by heart. Well, Sarah began, and her voice carried the weight of years and the lightness of hope. It was just another Tuesday morning. The story continued. The ripples spread. The revolution deepened. And somewhere in a diner or a coffee shop or a street corner, someone was about to make a choice. A small choice. A human choice. A choice that would ripple out in ways they couldn't imagine, touching lives they'd never meet. Proving once again that kindness isn't just nice. It's necessary. It's powerful. It's the force that makes us human. The universe holds its breath, waiting, always waiting for the next small act, the next infinite ripple, the next proof that love is the only revolution that lasts. Will it be you? Will it be today? Will it be the moment when you see someone invisible and choose to make them real? The story isn't over. It never is. It continues every time someone chooses connection over isolation. Every time someone gives what they can't afford to lose. Every time someone proves that we're better together than alone. Small acts, infinite ripples, forever and always. This is how we change the world. This is how we save each other. This is how we remember who we are. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Share your own story of a small act that created ripples in your life. Because this isn't just Sarah's story or Arthur and Rose's story, it's our story. All of us. Together. And it's just beginning. This channel is for those who believe in the power of small acts to change lives. For those who see the invisible. For those who know that kindness isn't weakness, it's the strongest force in the universe. Join the revolution, one ripple at a time.